So at that moment, he pulls out of his pocket a baseball style hand grenade. I could see it plain as day. It was like my eyeballs zoomed in on it. I could see his left hand shaking as he was trying to pull the pin out.
Hey gang, I guarantee if you're watching the main channel, you're seeing these videos of people in self-defense encounters all the time. People start bleeding, they start bleeding fast. And we as self-defenders should be interested in all the tools that can protect and preserve innocent life, and good trauma gear can do that. It's just as important as a firearm, maybe more so. Trauma is trauma. Whether it's a vehicle accident, a farming accident, or a gunshot wound, when seconds count, you need the right equipment for the job. You must get your trauma gear from a reputable source, and Mountain Man Medical is ASP's go-to source for all of our medical gear. Go to mountainmanmedical.com and let them know you heard about them on the ASP podcast. All right, gang, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am your host, Mike Williver, your favorite former Fed. With us today, Michael Warden. He is a husband and father of 5. He is a retired police sergeant from the Port Jervis, New York Police Department. He's here to talk to us about his critical incident, which happened a while back. Michael, how are you, sir?
Good. How you doing? Thank you for having me on the program.
So, Mike, you are retired LE. How long have you been retired from law enforcement?
So I retired at the beginning of June of 2021, actually. So what, about 7 months now?
Okay, so
pretty recent.
Yeah, same as me. Okay, very, very cool. So what part of the country did you grow up in? Are you from New York originally?
Yeah, I was born in Michigan, but I was from here. My family, I was raised here basically right outside of New York City, about 60 miles. Okay. 70 miles.
What made you want to go into law enforcement? I always ask cops that question, and don't tell me because you wanted to help people, because I know better.
Yeah. So I actually became a cop a little bit later. I was 29 when I got hired. I actually turned 30 in the academy. I had studied sports medicine in college, and I worked in exercise science for quite a few years, and I enjoyed doing that. But my brother is a police officer. And, it just seemed like something naturally that I was being drawn to. And with age limits, I had to make a choice. Would I be happy not pursuing it, or would I be happier pursuing it and see if it was something I wanted to do? And I decided that I was going to go for it, and I never looked back.
Well, aside from your brother, is there any other family members that were in LE?
No, since then, my other younger brother's become a deputy correction officer. And prior to that, if you go back to the early 1900s, my great grand uncle was the chief of police where I worked for, I think he was the longest serving chief from like 1917 to 1939.
Wow, that's crazy. So what year did you get hired initially with the PD?
So I was hired in 98 for a correction officer at the state of New York. I did that for just a month shy of a year. And then in July of 1999, I was hired, went through the academy, and hit the street in December of 99.
Yeah, that's back when it was very, very competitive to get into an LE job. There weren't many jobs open. I remember applying for stuff back in the early 90s, and it was like they'd have 600 applicants for each position they had open or something insane like that. I'm sure it was the same in 99 for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, showing up for the physical, just the amount of people for, a couple of openings that were showing up to do the physical fitness testing. It was crazy.
Well, people our age, when we were impressionable, correct me if I'm wrong, but for me, the big thing, 2 things influenced me aside from family members, Miami Vice and the show Cops on Fox. Am I wrong?
Definitely Miami Vice. I'm old enough to remember that. And of course, Cops. I mean, how can you not like watching that?
That was during our impressionable years. Cops was a huge phenomenon. Of course, you can't have any police shows on now showing the cops as being anything other than evil, terrible, racist, awful human beings. So no more of that. No more live PD, unfortunately. So talk to us about some of the assignments you had when you were in the police department and what you liked about them.
So I did the, I started at the bottom like all of us do. I was a patrol officer handling calls. I did that for almost 6.5 years. And we're a small city agency, but we're very close to New York, and we're exactly on the border of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. So we have a big influx of people from across the river in Pennsylvania, or just right across the border in Jersey. We're not far from the New York State Thruway. Interstate 84 passes right past our jurisdiction, and it's a major drug highway between New York City, Scranton. So we're a busy little agency. It's a poor area. So, there's a little bit more crime, drug abuse. I did that for a long time as a patrolman. In January of 2006, I was promoted to detective. And of course, that was the best job on earth. I mean, we handled we were like the emergency room doctor. Whatever came in the door, we took. I handled 4 homicides in my tenure, multiple sex crimes, burglaries, and a lot of narcotics cases. There's a few people that'll die in prison probably after I'm dead, who should be there, rightfully so. But and then in 2015, it's great to have a rank you love, detective, but you retire on your final average salary, and sometimes you have to do something, and that was get promoted to a job, which meant going back into uniform. You know, but I actually loved being a sergeant. The last few years, I worked steady midnights by choice. I had all of the young guys in the department, like brand new out of the academy, go getters. They reminded me of me when I was pretty new, and I loved it. They reinvigorated me. Even with all the changes, it was still the best job on earth. I had another officer I know who a couple of years ago, before the COVID shutdown, I was excited to work New Year's Eve, one of the craziest nights to be a cop. And he's like, "You got like 20 years on the job. Why are you working New Year's Eve?" I'm like, "Because I want to."
Yeah, can confirm, by the way, that's true. That is a fun night to be working.
I mean, it would be insane, but to me, that's just what made the job so exciting. I loved it.
Yeah, I remember being assigned to a gang task force in the North County of San Diego, and if I could manage to be out with the gang suppression unit on New Year's Eve, in San Diego area, there's a lot of the game we play called, is that fireworks or gunfire, and so around midnight we would actually all throw our helmets on and stand underneath the awning of a local bank just to be on the safe side. But I definitely can relate to that. And I think once that stuff's not fun anymore, it's time to go. It's time to move on and let the young guys, as young meat eaters, get in there and do their thing. So I'm fascinated by your description of your time as a detective. So you guys didn't have a very big department. About how many people were on that agency at any one time?
So there's about 33 sworn officers, and that includes the chief, lieutenants, the sergeants, and then detectives.
So you were a catch-all. I worked with bigger agencies, generally speaking, so at least 200-300 sworn members on the places, up to thousands depending on where I was working at the time. And so most of them would have what you might call an area or general detective who handles the burglaries, the car theft, stuff like that. Then they have dedicated homicide, narcotics, gangs. So you kind of did whatever, like you said, whatever came in the door, you handle it. That's very interesting. Did you enjoy that aspect of it?
I did. And when I first became a detective, there was only 2 adult detectives who handled adult cases. And then there was a third detective who strictly handled juvenile cases. That was his sole responsibility. They created a detective sergeant in 2010. So, the last few years I had a sergeant working who was also a detective. But other than that, I liked that you could be doing one thing. I remember I was working on a search warrant on a narcotics case, and we had a stolen property case from the state police in Jersey come in where it was in a house in town and they needed a search warrant like ASAP. And, you're quickly switching gears, like, okay, let me get this search warrant banged out. And, not knowing was kind of exciting. It's just like being a patrolman, not knowing what that next call is going to be.
Talk to us about the training. I don't know what the standards are like. I assume the state of New York has a uniform standard for police officer training. They call it POST here in Arizona and in California, police officer standard training. What's the training standard like in New York, and how do you feel your training prepared you to do your job when you were on the job?
So in New York, it's the Division of Criminal Justice Services and the Municipal Police Training Council. They set the state standard for peace officer training and then police officer training. It's a pretty rigorous academy. When I went through the Rockland County Police Academy, and they have they're basically zones where each academy handles so many counties. Where I went, we got a lot of New York City investigators from the DA's office. They would be sent up to this academy, very military-like. You're doing a lot of drill, a lot of push-ups, a lot of drill instructors in your face. Yeah. But very rigorous in terms of not just the theoretical end of it, the laws, the criminal procedure, but they were really big on defensive tactics, street survival, did a lot of scenarios. So I felt pretty confident when I got out of the academy that I had at least what I needed to start. And you know how it is being on law enforcement, all that stuff in the academy is great, but nothing prepares you until you're on the street with your feet on the ground and thrown into a situation and having to do it.
Yeah, on the job training for sure. You probably remember. I remember the first person I arrested. I had to, to actually. It's an out of body experience. The first time you actually detain someone and you say you can't go home today. I'm taking you to jail. It was a very strange experience, but I feel like my academy gave me a good base for that.
My first arrest was an open container, which is someone drinking a beer in public. But like you said, you don't forget that. I to this day remember that moment.
Now, was that you took someone to jail for that?
We gave him an appearance ticket, but it's
Okay.
technically an arrest.
All right, I gotcha. I was gonna say I don't think I like you as much as I thought I did, Mr. Warden.
No, it's just
That's great. So, how do you feel the firearms training was? Because I'm specifically firearms training because your incident involved the use of a firearm. So, do you feel like your training, the PD gave you was sufficient? Did you ever seek out any training of your own?
So the academy training was a very intensive. I mean, we spent over a week at the range. I actually got the Top Gun award in my academy class.
Nice.
Just a lot of shooting between pistol and shotgun, especially at that time. We didn't carry patrol rifles until a handful of years ago. But even at the PD, our range officers were very, very strict. They ran a tight range. They still do. And they really prepared you, on, everything they teach you. And they always say you revert to your training. It's very true. They're very big on, discipline, sight discipline, getting that pistol up, getting it on target. Not sitting there taking an hour to squeeze off a shot because you want to get that perfect score, but, getting that gun up and getting shots on target.
Let us talk about the incident that you contacted me about that happened to you. About when did this happen?
So it's December 14th, 2007, which seems like forever ago.
Yeah, it really does. June of last year seems like forever ago, but yeah, 2007.
That's true.
Seems like a long time. So what assignment were you in at the time, and where did this happen?
So I was a detective, and it happened in the back parking lot of our local hospital. Our hospital has a mental health unit, a secure unit. And I had actually been up there as a detective that shift. It was a 3 to 11 shift. And I had to go up there because I had a open sex investigation with a gentleman that was on the mental unit. And he had called because he basically misremembered some incidents. And without going into details, there was no crime. But I had to go up and verify that with him, sit face to face with him. And being the secure unit, you're not supposed to carry a weapon on there. So I went in, I secured my weapon, but I wanted a patrolman to stand outside the door in case things went south quick. And, I knew someone would have my back. And so we had just been up at the hospital when this whole incident was about to unfold. It was kind of like an interesting coincidence.
Okay, so you wrap up your interview, right, with this person, and then you leave. You rearm yourself on the way out the door, and then walk us through what happened then.
So we're leaving the station, and I had jumped in with a patrolman, and we get a call to stop back from the desk sergeant. At that time, we didn't have dispatchers. So the sergeant in charge of the shift is the one who sat at the desk, took the phone calls, dispatched you on calls. The sergeant called us back, and we come back to the station, and it's myself, the patrolman I was with, Officer Kevin Riley, and then 2 other officers who were working that shift. And he basically gives us a quick briefing that a woman had called the police station that her father was in the midst of a psychotic episode. He had just gotten his guns back by court order, and he was seen walking around the development. He lived right across the river in PA. They have a lot of developments, a lot of former city people. And he had been walking around the development with a handgun that morning. And she said he was on his way to the hospital to, quote, kill people and blow things up.
So when you say he was walking around with a firearm, do we mean holstered? Do we mean sticking out of a pocket or in his hand or what?
In his hand, a 38 caliber revolver in his hand.
And now he's headed to the hospital you had just left. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, why there? Had he been there as an inmate before or a patient, or what was the connection between him and that place?
So he had a lot of health issues. In addition to mental health issues, he had cancer. I think he had a really bad heart condition. He had been on the phone with his doctor that day, and the doctor told him, you need to go to the hospital. And he said, well, if I'm going back to the hospital, I'm going to kill people and blow things up. And we weren't given a lot of details because the daughter had initially called the PA State Police, and they were basically like, oh, you got to call Port Jervis because he's not in PA. he's going to be heading to port. So all we knew was he was driving a black Nissan Xterra. He was a Vietnam vet, and he had a lot of stickers on it related to being a veteran. I mean, that's it. It's not a lot to go on.
No.
And that he was probably armed with a handgun.
You leave the station, you and your partner and another 2 uniformed officers. Is that correct?
I was in the I stayed in the patrol car with Officer Kevin Riley, and the hospital, the way it's set up, it's sort of you can basically get to that hospital the quickest way from PA from 2 directions. So we sat in a funeral home parking lot, which was right next door, to watch traffic. We had another officer in a car 2 blocks away to watch traffic in that direction. So basically, if the guy comes by us in either way, he's going to see him or we're going to see him. In the event he got through, we had the other officer down by the emergency room entrance backed in. So just in case, like if this guy gets in before we see him, we at least have an extra officer there. We're sitting there in the parking lot. It's 10 days before Christmas. You get that gut feeling, and they tell you in the academy about that, like, oh, you're going to get this, trust your instincts. We would go up to the hospital a lot for calls, mental patients, people coming to the hospital to make threats. This one felt different. Just from the initial call, like sitting in that car, like you just felt it. It's very hard to explain.
Yeah, I know that feeling. And they're also occasionally you get a sense of impending, not so much doom, but just some bad stuff's about to happen. I remember not long ago, we had on the show the 2 deputies from Brevard County. I don't know if you saw the shootout they had where that guy came out of the back seat with an AR pattern pistol and started shooting at them. And even before I met them, we're making the video, me and John, for the main channel, for the badge cam video. And I commented, I'm like, as he's chatting with that guy in the back seat, everybody in that situation, everybody knew this was going to go poorly. They just didn't know how or when exactly. So I said to John, I know how they feel. They're like, this is gonna break in the wrong direction, and I just don't know when or how. It's a terrible feeling because there's nothing you can do about it. It's just whatever's going to happen is going to happen. So, can I ask you, is your experience anything like mine, where suddenly you're on the lookout for a black Nissan Xterra? There's 8,000 black Nissan Xterras, or am I wrong?
You know what? That night there really wasn't, but this all happened so quickly.
Right.
By the time we were at the station getting this quick briefing, thrown together, Officer Riley threw this plan together, where we were going to set up. And I trusted his instincts. He'd been a cop a little bit longer than I had. Great street cop, 100% trusted with my life. And, we were only up there maybe five minutes, if that. And, mostly we had a conversation about, that we had that feeling. We actually talked about that just briefly. Like, I don't know what's going on here, but, that mindset, I'm going home to my family tonight. No matter what happens, I'm going home.
You guys are posted up there waiting. About how long from the time you parked until this guy shows up?
It was probably a matter of 5 minutes.
Okay. So who spotted the vehicle first?
We're talking, and we see Officer Riley, Kevin Riley, sees the black Xterra entering into the parking lot from the direction where another officer, who I won't name, should have been paying attention, and it got by him. We all have those in every department, I guess. So he called on the radio to the officer that was by the emergency room and said, was that a black Nissan Xterra? And he says, yes. So we pulled out and indicated that we would take the primary in stopping the vehicle because there's 2 of us. Mm-hmm. And then we already have that second car right there. So at least we have 2 cars immediately going to be there. The back parking lot is where the entrance to the hospital was at that time. So it's busy. There's a ton of cars. There's people going in to visit. There's people going into work or leaving work, depending on their shift. It's where all the oxygen tanks are, like the whole back deck. We get behind the guy. We light him up, but unfortunately, he dictated where the stop was going to be.
Sure.
Because we didn't have that advantage of stopping him before he got in the parking lot. So he basically pulls into a spot. Riley positions the car where he was able to use the car for concealment and some cover. I had a big gap. And I remember the last thing he said to me was basically, sorry, man, you're screwed. Because he knew I was stepping out and didn't have any concealment or cover between me and the guy.
Your partner said that to you?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah, he said, sorry, man, you're screwed. Because he knew, like, we think this guy might have a gun, and this is the only way we can stop this car and get out before, he gets out with a gun.
You stopped the car. I assume you observed all the stickers, so you were pretty sure you had the right vehicle at this point. Had you seen him prior to stopping him? Had you get a look at the guy yet? No?
No. So the minute we stop the car, he is immediately out of the car. And he's a big dude. He had to be 6'2", 6'3", real big. He had a big, long trench coat on. And he kept...
It's always a good sign.
Yeah. So, and he was diving into his pockets. Now, he was a former NYPD cop. He went out on a disability back in probably the 70s and 80s. He worked. And he was doing the, diving in, that he'd pull his hand out real quick, which probably would have got you shot back in the 70s or 80s. Mm-hmm. And he's yelling back at his car constantly. Look what you've done. He's screaming. We're basically got him at gunpoint, telling him, listen, just show us your hands, talk to us. We want to talk to you, but you got to keep your hands where you can see him. He's oblivious. He's not even hearing our commands. At that point, I realized his wife is in the passenger seat of this black Nissan Xterra. And the thing that popped in my head is he's going to get in the car and now we're going to have a hostage situation. If he has a gun. So I remember I had my gun in my hand. I crouched down and I ran along the side of his vehicle. He's out of the car still, back and forth, screaming and yelling. And I remember popping in my head this quick thought as I ran along it, like, this guy could just turn around and shoot through this glass and take my head out. But I had to get her off the scene. I just remember opening the door, grabbing her arm. Thank God she wasn't seatbelted in, because I just started pulling her out. The other officer on the stop came over and I said, get her away from here. Mm-hmm. The minute he realized she was out of the vehicle, it escalated. He directed his attention to Riley 100%. I got back on with my pistol. So at that moment, he pulls out of his pocket a baseball style hand grenade. It's in his hands and I could see it plain as day. It was like my eyeballs zoomed in on it. I could see the bottom of it. It was solid, because I've seen paperweight grenades. They're drilled out. They're hollow. This was solid. I could see his left hand shaking as he was trying to pull the pin out, like as if it was in my face. And he was probably a good 25 feet away. At that point, I realized, he's saying we're going to die. I tried to stop. I had to stop him. I discharged one round. I never heard my gun go off. Never heard a gunshot. Officer Kevin Riley shot one time also. I never heard his gunshot. He immediately went down. And then it just, in my head, I just remember yelling out grenade, and we turned around and ran and got behind a car. Now, unfortunately, action is faster than reaction. We probably, had it been a live grenade, would not have outran serious injury.
He was struck twice, once by you, once by your partner?
Yes.
Do you know where he was struck? So
he was facing Riley. Like I said, when his wife left the scene, when he turned around, he had a, eye contact with Riley. Mm-hmm. He was struck here on the chin. It traveled along the base, took out his spinal column, and came out the head. My round came in. I had him on an angle, mm-hmm. and it came in on his side and went through his heart, lungs, and came out the other side.
Pretty instantaneous, yeah.
So he had 2 fatal shots, and he was dead on his feet instant.
At this point, you and your partner have managed to find some sort of cover in the anticipation of this thing detonating. And it would have been devastating had it done so, based on your description of where you were and what was around you. During this moment leading up to the shooting, were you aware of other people around you? Were you aware of, for example, what your backstop was going to be, what was beyond him, that sort of thing? Because I think a lot of people kind of take for granted that you're going to be in tunnel vision and not know those things. But if you can remember, were you able to see and hear what was going on around you, or were you hyper fixated on him and on the grenade?
No, because I could hear Riley talking and yelling. I could hear his commands. I could hear my commands. I could hear what he was saying. Mm-hmm. That, this is, and it was literally, it was all a couple of seconds between when she got out of the car and he realized she was gone, that he pulled it out. It just happened. In my mind, it seems like it took minutes to happen, like slow motion, but in reality, it was probably 5 to 10 seconds max. And that's pushing it, where he got the grenade out, pulled the pin, and was shot.
How long do you think you sat behind that car, if you can possibly gauge it? I know it's got to be hard to gauge that kind of time passing because you're all geeked up. But if you can remember, about how long did you wait there before you figured, well, it's either a fake or you didn't pull the pin?
Probably a minute goes by. I remember Riley peeking around because he was trying to see if he was down, if he was alive, if he's still a threat. He's trying to see that it's winter. It's December 14th. It was a very weird atmospheric. There was some snow on the ground, but it had been a little warmer. So I had this almost like a foggy feel to the air. I remember Riley peeking around. I'm peeking around. And then we realized, it's not going off. So either he's laying on it, maybe it's a dud, maybe it's, I don't know, a delayed fuse, maybe it's just an old grenade. I don't know. They didn't teach us that in the academy.
Right.
But then at that point, I realized, we have people, there's cars coming in. We got to secure this scene. So I had the other officer that was present. He had moved the wife over to another spot. I'm like, you got to get your car and block the entrance to the lot. Security had come out. I'm yelling to security, don't let anybody back here. We were calling for help for a supervisor. We couldn't get one on the scene. So we basically stood there. At some point, Riley could see him down and knew he wasn't a threat anymore and communicated that. And then we basically secured the scene best we could and waited for other officers to arrive.
I assume the presence of a grenade that you still didn't really know the status of had to have complicated that crime scene. Was the bomb squad called, or how was that done?
Yes. Yeah. So we advised that, you're going to need a bomb squad. And what popped in my head when we were behind that car is when we were kids, my grandfather had a Carcano rifle, the Italian style, but like the one that killed Kennedy, but the real big one.
Right.
And we would go shoot this thing, and he had bullets they had to be from like 1910, because we would hold this big gun, we would pull the trigger, and sometimes you'd hear a click, but the bullet wouldn't go off right away. It would take a couple seconds. And of course, the gun kicks like a mule, especially when you're a kid.
Yeah.
So you had this terrifying couple seconds where it's about to go off. And I remember that popping in my head, that those old bullets not exploding for a while. Like, is it? I just remember that going in my head, thinking all those times going with my grandpa shooting.
Yeah, that's why we teach our young recruits and our firearm students to keep the weapon pointed in a safe direction in the event of a click instead of a bang, because you never know when that delayed round might go off. And you were thinking, well, maybe something like this could happen with a grenade possibly. And I know probably as much as you do about grenades, which is to say I've seen them in the movies. So the bomb squad comes. Who investigates the follow-up with this? Is it your department? Is it the state? Or is it the county? Or how does that work?
So at this time, New York State has since changed the law where the Attorney General has exclusive jurisdiction over police-related shootings. At that time, there hadn't been a fatal police shooting in my jurisdiction since the 80s. So my brother was the chief at the time. He's a lot more time on the job than I've got. He still is the chief. Once we got relieved from the scene, we went back to the station to wait for our union attorney, who was going to meet us there. The state police comes in and assists with the district attorney's office in conducting the investigation, with our agency assisting in that investigation. But the state police and the district attorney's office are the ones handling the nuts and bolts.
I've said it before in this space, but I think the average person thinks that the police, they see movies and TV, and the cops get into a shooting. They blow the smoke off of their still warm barrel. They holster up, and then they go find some beautiful chick and have a martini, and all's right with the world. And nothing could be further from the truth. I've known people that have been in this situation. It's not a fun place to be. It's not a comfortable place to be, because make no mistake, you are being investigated, and the people investigating you have no qualms if they think you messed up. They have no qualms about putting you in the hot seat and potentially in jail. There's potential civil ramifications. So it's not a fun thing to have been involved in. Post shooting, initially, and then going forward during the investigation, were you at any point concerned? Sounds like it was a pretty clean shoot, but what were your thoughts after it went down?
So initially, when we got back to the station, we went down to my office in the basement. First thing we did was we secured our handguns and magazines we have firearm lockbox when you walk in, like for prisoners, if you're going to put people in the cell. So We knew they're going to take our guns. Everybody's watched enough TV. So we immediately each picked a lockbox, took our gun, stuck it in, took our magazines, put them in there, locked it, gave the key to the sergeant who logged it in. So they didn't take our guns. We knew they're going to take them as evidence, but they weren't going to take it off of us.
Did you have a replacement firearm? Is that how they do it there, or no?
But that night before we went home, they made sure we had a replacement firearm. Our department did.
Yeah, I think that's so critical. As long as there's no serious questions or obvious questions about the shoot, I think it's critical to give an officer or deputy or agent a replacement firearm as soon as possible, because there's just a psychological aspect to it that I don't think I could probably explain. I'm not qualified, but I'm sure you get the idea. Talk to us about post-traumatic stress. Did you have any? Was there any? I know this was a fairly justified shooting, but I know a lot of people that have been in situations where there was very cut and dried and they still had some problems sleeping. They had some problems in relationships. So talk to us about that. Was that an issue for you at all?
So initially, no. I just felt, I was mentally prepared to make that decision. It's just one of those things when they asked me that in my interview, if that was something I thought I could do if I had to. And, I was at peace with what I had to do. I felt I acted according to my training. I didn't think I had any other options. It's stressful being investigated. A couple of months went by before we had to testify at the grand jury. You had to waive immunity to testify, where they're reading this a waiver to you that basically, if you're indicted, everything you tell the grand jury is now going to be used against you. In New York, you have the right to an attorney in a grand jury, but that attorney can't participate in the proceedings, doesn't object to questions, or just kind of there. You get a letter in the mail. You're the target of an investigation into the death of another person.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little intimidating whether you think you're justified or not justified. Those things are definitely on your mind. But we were cleared by a grand jury, which I didn't think was going to be an issue. We went to a psychologist. The department sent us to a psychologist who's a retired state police investigator, psychologist. And he basically told us what a great job we did, which was great. I didn't doubt whether or not we did our job. He didn't really prepare us for how things might come down the road. No one really talked about that kind of stuff. So about a year later, I started having some problems. I noticed even right away, I startled easily. My kids got cap guns, my two youngest at the time. I only had two kids at that time. They were twins, got cap guns. And when they would shoot them at Christmas, I would jump. Of course, they thought that was funny. So what do you think they did, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shoot the gun behind dad's back.
Right.
But I definitely, in 2008, started definitely having some issues, which completely caught me off guard. A lot of sleeping issues, hypervigilance, searching the house, come home from work, checking the house top to bottom in case someone's in there, little things like that.
I'm familiar with hypervigilance. Ask me how I know about hypervigilance. And it's funny. So I think people, cops are not. I think people have an image in their head of the hypervigilant cop coming home from work and literally doing a hard target search like he's searching, a stranger's house. It's not that. It starts very subtly. You're like, let me double check the door, make sure it's locked. And the next thing you know, you're checking all sorts of things, and it's really not, it gets to a point where it's not reasonable anymore.
Exactly.
Is that how it happened for you as well?
Yeah. Because, like you said, it starts with, did I lock the door? Is that window locked? Because I have an old house.
Mm-hmm.
Let me go check the upstairs. Let me go check this. And then is the basement door secured? Okay. Those are all fairly reasonable, but then it start looking under things where a cat couldn't get under. And I remember at one point realizing this is utterly ridiculous. If the person could fit under there, they'd have to be paper thin,
right?
But still doing it,
right?
Knowing that it was completely out of sorts, but still doing it anyway.
So you were concerned potentially about a series of gingerbread men breaking into homes.
Yes.
In your area. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean by that. Tell the folks at home who may not know about how this works. Are you and the other officers that were involved, especially your partner, the one who shot, are you allowed to discuss these events while the investigation is ongoing, to talk to each other about it?
Yes. So we, of course, were allowed to talk to each other. We met with our attorney several times. We never gave an interview to state police. They wanted to interview us the night of the shooting, and our lawyer had us go to the hospital to be checked out, got us out of the station, got us checked out. Um, my administration said they're not submitting to an interview hours after being involved in this. And whether they submit to an interview is their decision. And between them and their attorney, we did have to give an internal report, which is mandated, but that was an internal report only.
And how long before you had to turn that in after the shooting?
Oh, it was probably a month.
Okay. So folks listening, whether you're a cop or not, if you're just a self-defender, you get involved in a critical incident. It might not even be a shooting. It might be something else. But if you defend yourself and someone is seriously injured or killed as a result of your actions, I was a cop. My new buddy Michael here was a cop, but we will both tell you the same thing. Do not talk to the cops right away, no matter what else is going on. I know cops hate it when I say that, but because the fact is, if you say something in the heat of that moment, that because you're geeked up because you just got into a shooting and it's only hours afterwards or even a day afterwards, your mind isn't right. And if you say something that you later contradict, you're going to have a problem one way or another. And you just don't want to put yourself in that situation. And any cop, any investigator worth his or her salt will not object to you at least saying, hey, I just want to hold off on that. I want to talk to an attorney. That's just the way to go. And I think, Michael, you would agree with that, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And our attorney assisted us in drafting our written report. Our attorney basically communicated on our behalf to the district attorney's office. He's the one who said, they'll testify at the grand jury. We didn't want to question and answer testimony. That's how it often happens. We wanted to come in and tell our story to the grand jury.
Now, was there any civil follow-up? Did anyone try to sue you as a result of this?
Nope. No civil follow-up, which I thought would happen. Didn't.
I mean, it almost always does. It's almost always a family member that will find a reason to sue you. I tell everyone I train that, I'm like, look, keep your liability insurance up to date, because if you do get into a shooting, it could be Hitler reincarnated is about to murder a little girl on national television, and someone will find a reason to sue you, even if you're the guy who saved the day for that. So, also to our citizen defenders out there, to our active self-protectors, make sure you've got some sort of coverage ahead of time. It's once you've got the disease, it's too late to get the insurance. So if you carry a gun, if you are a serious self-defender, it behooves you to have something. We endorse Firearms Legal Protection. That is our in-house company, and Terry Johnson is a good friend. But to get something and get it ahead of time, folks, don't forget to stick around after this interview, which I really enjoyed, by the way. Don't forget to stick around afterwards to hear us talk to our good friend Stephen Gutowski in the Gutowski Files. He will keep us up to date on the goings-on in the world of the Second Amendment. Michael, before I let you go, is there anything else you wanted to talk about that I maybe didn't ask you?
No, I'm just looking at my timeline here. So we time-wise, we got this off of the radio transcripts. We called out at the hospital at the perimeter at 16:59 hours. The vehicle entered the parking lot at 17:05 hours and 50 seconds. He was out of his vehicle at 17:05:58. I pulled his wife out at 17:06:21, and shots were fired at 17:06:32. So 11 seconds after. And wow. we teach this at the academy. We go at the last week of the academy to do a street survival where officers come in that have been involved in shootings. Some have been shot. And one of the things we always tell them is this stuff happens fast. It's not like on TV. It's literally less than a minute between getting out of the car and being involved in a life or death decision making. It's part of the job, and it's something that we always tell recruits. And I was set in on even new hire interviews. We used to ask them, "Are you prepared to make that decision?" Because you can't have that moral conversation in the heat of the moment. You need to have that. You need to be comfortable with that decision now, and know that you can pull that trigger and not hesitate.
Yeah, I say it all the time on the main channel. You have to have had that conversation in your head ahead of time. In the heat of the moment, when it's time to potentially pull the trigger, you're not going to be able. You're going to be indecisive potentially. So now having that conversation does not guarantee that you'll be able to do what you should do, but it goes a long way towards promoting the idea that if you find yourself in a set of circumstances where it is clearly justifiable and you should, not could, but you should pull the trigger to protect yourself or others, that you'll be able to do that without hesitating, because hesitating will get you killed. It will get your family killed. It'll get other people killed.
I do want to give a big shout out to you guys in the Active Self-Protection YouTube. I can't tell you how many times in our yearly training I did the use of force legal aspect of it, what the law says, and we would watch a lot of your videos, and no one likes to Monday morning quarterback other officers, but sometimes that's how you learn. And those mistakes that unfortunately get made might save somebody else. So that channel's great. I encourage people to watch it and pay attention to it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's our goal with all the videos, but as far as I'm concerned, I work in the badge cam videos. There's only been a couple times that I'm like, that cop was just a knucklehead. It doesn't happen that often, but when it happens, I will call out, what I'm seeing. And if I'm seeing terrible behavior, if I'm seeing bad policing, I will call that out as well. It's so funny you should say that, because we had a video come out recently involving a deputy in South Carolina who went to some kind of alarm call, and the homeowner came to the door in the middle of the night, groggy, just took his CPAP machine off, armed, and raised a firearm from inside the house through an open window at the deputy, and the deputy shot. And we went through, I think, a lot of analysis on that as to why we thought the deputy was justified. We just did another video to go over stuff that I think we had 11,000 comments in the first days, and that's a crazy amount of comments. So we did another video, me, Neil, and John, that by the time this comes out will have aired on the main channel, talking about it from other perspectives, from the perspective of the homeowner, because Neil Widener, who's our chief marketing officer, great guy, a phenomenal shooter. We were on our in-house group our group text or whatever, and we had a disagreement. And it was like, well, I don't see it that way. And I think he said, I think maybe because you and some of the other people in the chat were former LE, you see it differently. And I'm like, no, I don't. And then after I thought about it, I'm like, well, of course I do. Of course I look at it through, the lens of LE. So hearing you say that means a lot. And you've got my number now. You've got my email. So if at any point
definitely.
there's anything you think I screwed up, please give me a call and let me know. Is there anything you wanted to plug? I know you said you had a podcast. Is that still active or no?
I do co-host a podcast called Murder in the Hudson Valley. It's on HudsonRiverRadio.com. It's also available on any podcast format. We talk about mostly Hudson Valley, New York related homicides, but sometimes we do branch out into other ones, and some are old, some are more current, but we try to delve into the aspects of the case, the forensics, the details, and get that whole story told.
Interesting. My wife and daughter would love it. They just love murder, man. I don't know what it is with the women these days, but they love murder stuff.
They would like these.
Oh, very good. Well, I'll let them know. Michael, I want to thank you so much for coming on, man. I really, really enjoyed this. This was one of my favorite podcasts so far. So thanks again for being here. And like I said, you got my number. If anything I can do for you, hit me up.
Definitely. Thanks, Mike. Good talking to you.
All right, gang. Welcome back to this week's installment of the Gutowski Files with our friend, Steve Gutowski. Steven is the founder of TheReload.com and the host of the Weekly Reload podcast, which can be found on all of your finer, more distinguished podcast networks. Okay, all of them. Plus,
the trashy ones too.
Plus on YouTube, also on YouTube. So check him out there as well. Steven, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So this week we are discussing something interesting. It's kind of been a running theme actually with us: permitless carry. And this week in particular, we're discussing the state of Georgia and the Democrat gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams, who was defeated, I believe, last time by Governor Kemp. Is that correct?
That's right. Back in 2018.
Okay.
Kemp beat Abrams.
And that was pretty contentious election. She's running again. And there has been some discussion about permitless carry, meaning people can carry a firearm there without a permit, without the state's, permission, quote unquote.
Right.
And she says,
so long as you are, this is an important point, right? So long as you are legally allowed to possess a gun in the first place.
Okay, so her contention is the idea of permitless carry, if it is enacted, will help criminals, which is hilarious to me as a former law enforcement officer, because, and this just seems obvious, it should be the end of this discussion, actually. criminals don't get permits. Stephen, would you like to comment on this?
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I think people who are generally the drivers of crime, and especially gun crimes, don't seek out concealed carry permits. But
All right. See you next week. Thanks so much for being.
But her full comment was, it's not. She was asked whether or not she supports constitutional carry, which is another term for permitless carry. And she says, it's not simply about crimes being committed. It's about how safe we are in our communities. Why would we make it easier for people who have felonies, who have mental illnesses, who have demonstrated a lack of responsibility? Why would we make it easier for them to carry weapons? Why would we make it easier for our communities to be put in harm's way? So she's saying here directly that specifically felons and people who have who have been adjudicated mentally ill and can't possess guns in the first place would have an easier time of carrying a gun with permitless carry. And obviously there's a big problem with that, even beyond just the point that like criminals generally don't care about the gun laws that they're violating. You also have the issue of like, this implies that it makes it legal for someone who's prohibited to carry a firearm, if permitless carry goes into effect. And that's just not true.
And as you said at the top, if this passed in Georgia and anywhere else, I believe the other states that have permitless carry, the idea is you have to be legally able to possess a firearm, say at home or whatever else, or to purchase a firearm in order for this to apply to you. So it really, right. her argument makes zero sense to me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of, it's almost so simple that it starts to sound confusing because right, the federal law and state laws as well, in the vast majority of states, including Georgia, make it so that if you are convicted of a felony or adjudicated mentally ill or convicted of a domestic violence misdemeanor as well, it is illegal for you to buy or even possess a gun. It means you can't touch a gun, you can't hold a gun. And so obviously if you're carrying a gun around on you, you're in possession of it. And that would remain a crime whether or not your state has a permitting system for different kinds of gun carry, concealed carry or open carry. And so that's the problem with her statement here is like, how does removing the permit system make it easier for criminals to carry guns? Like it doesn't practically and it doesn't legally. So, I reached out to her campaign, to be fair, to see if she was going to elaborate on this position at all or wanted to correct herself or whatever. And they didn't respond to my request for comment. So
shocking. So for the folks at home, I can break this down for you pretty easily from a law enforcement perspective. If nothing changed, if the law stayed the same and you needed a CCW to carry a firearm and a felon or someone adjudicated mentally ill or a domestic violence convict were to be caught carrying a firearm, they would go to jail. If they change the law and they pass permitless carry, if the law enforcement contacts a felon or a person adjudicated mentally ill or someone convicted of DV with a gun, they go to jail. So literally it means nothing. If the law passes, those people still can't carry a gun legally. So I think this to me just exposes some of the double talk. And again, it's both sides of the aisle. It's not just Democrats, it's not just Republicans, but people I think they're hoping that you don't pay attention to what they're actually saying. And this is a pretty good example of that. I'm really glad that you caught this and wrote a story on it. Otherwise, I think a lot of folks wouldn't even have noticed it. That's why people should subscribe to The Reload. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. That final point there is a very good point. But yeah, no, I think generally speaking here, you have to stay on top of what elected officials say or what candidates for office say, because it's important to how they're going to govern. And in this case, I mean, even beyond just the fact that she made this error, told this lie about what permitless carry would do, you do also have the important context that she obviously opposes this policy, whereas the opponent she's likely to face, whether it's the current governor, or David Perdue, the former senator who's running in the primary against Kemp, they both support the policy. So that gives you more information about, perhaps how you would want to vote, depending on how you feel about this policy. So that's another aspect of this story that makes it matter.
You know, I always end this segment roughly the same way, and I appeal to our listeners to go over to thereload.com and to buy a membership. Stephen, can you just tell us briefly, if they went over there and visited your website, what would they see? How much are these memberships, and what do they get for them?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we've got memberships that are monthly or yearly, where it's $10 a month, $100 a year. So you get a little bit of a discount if you buy the yearly membership. We also have a lifetime membership for people who want to kind of give extra support to what we're trying to accomplish with the publication. You know, it's $1,000 for a lifetime membership, and those memberships have helped sustain us through this early part of building this publication, because this is 100% reader funded. We don't have any corporate investors. We aren't funded by any of the gun groups, and we do that on purpose in order to try and keep ourselves independent editorially, so that we can talk about different candidates or gun groups and cover them objectively, or do our best to cover them, you know, with an eye of skepticism, and tell our audience the truth about what's going on, rather than what some funder wants to be told.
And as I said earlier, folks, if I hadn't been talking to Stephen, he hadn't shown me the story, if I hadn't seen it on the Reload, I wouldn't have known she made this statement. I think these politicians on both sides of the aisle are counting on the fact that you're listening to a soundbite, you're reading a quick headline, and that you won't dig any deeper and find out what they're actually talking about, or catching them in a completely false statement like in this case. So go over to reload.com, consider getting a membership and supporting Stephen's excellent work. Stephen, I want to thank you once again for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We'll see you next week.